The sun had barely risen when Adaeze began her daily routine. At 5 months pregnant, her belly was starting to show, and with each passing day, the weight of the child grew heavier, not only physically but emotionally. It had been a long and painful journey, not just because of her pregnancy, but because of the situation that surrounded her. Adaeze, once a vibrant and hopeful woman, was now a shadow of herself, living in fear and distress. Her husband Chike had not always been like this when they first met. He was kind, gentle, and full of dreams. They had met in the bustling streets of Lagos, where Adaeze had moved in search of better opportunities. Coming from a small village in Enugu, Lagos was a different world for her, fast-paced, loud, and filled with promises. Chike had been one of those promises. He worked as a mechanic, and although he didn't have much, he had ambition. He spoke of building a future together, of having children, and creating a loving home. At first, he treated her like a queen. Every time he saw her, his eyes lit up with affection, and Adaeze felt lucky to have found such a man in the big city. But as time passed, Chike changed. The first sign of trouble appeared soon after they got married. Chike became distant, often coming home late and avoiding her. His temper, once so mild, began to flare up at the slightest provocation. Adaeze, confused by his sudden change, tried to understand what was happening. She blamed herself, thinking she wasn't doing enough to make him happy. She cooked his favorite meals, cleaned the house meticulously, and waited up for him at night, hoping to talk to him. But Chike wasn't interested in talking. His silence was filled with anger, and when he did speak, it was often harsh. The first time he hit her, Adaeze was 3 months pregnant. She had asked him about his late nights, worried that something was wrong. Chike, instead of answering her, Chike slapped her across the face, sending her crashing to the floor. She had clutched her stomach, terrified for the life growing inside her. Chike didn't apologize. Instead, told her she was too noisy, that she should mind her own business and stop acting like a child. Adaeze was in shock. This wasn't the man she had married, the man who had promised to take care of her, who had held her so lovingly during their courtship, was now a stranger, a monster. The abuse continued after that first incident. Chike's anger was unpredictable. Sometimes he would come home in a good mood, and for a moment, Adaeze would see quick look of the man she fell in love with. But those moments were rare. They never lasted long. More often than not, he came home angry, smelling of alcohol, and looking for someone to take out his frustrations on. That someone was always Adaeze. The verbal abuse was just as painful as the physical. He called her names, degrading her in ways that left her feeling worthless. He blamed her for everything, for his bad days at work, for the baby they were expecting, even for the fact that they were struggling financially. If you weren't so useless, maybe we did have more money, he would say, his voice dripping with scorn. You can't even give me a son yet, just this burden you're carrying. Adaeze wanted to leave. She had thought about it many times, but where would she go? Her family was back in the village, and they had warned her about the difficulties of marriage. Her mom had said, marriage is not easy, Adaeze. There will be challenges, but you must endure. That is what women do. We endure. Adaeze didn't want to disappoint her family, and besides, she had nowhere to turn. Lagos was a big city, but it was also lonely for a woman like her, especially now that she was pregnant. The baby inside her was the only thing that kept her going. She dreamt of holding her child, of giving them the love and care that she never received from Chike. She hoped that maybe, just maybe, the arrival of their baby would soften Chike, remind him of the man he used to be. But as the days passed, that hope grew dimmer. One particular bad evening, Chike came back home in a rage. He had lost money in a gambling game and he was furious. The moment he stepped through the door, Adaeze knew that she was in danger. His eyes were wild and his fists were clenched. He didn't say a word as he stormed towards her, and before she could react, he grabbed her by the hair and dragged her across the room. Adaeze screamed, her hand instinctively going to her stomach to protect the baby. But Chike didn't care. He was blinded by his anger. "You think you're better than me?" he shouted, kicking her as she lay on the ground. "You think you can judge me, you useless woman?" Each word was punctuated by a blow, and Adaeze could do nothing but crawl into a ball, praying that the baby would survive. The pain was unbearable, and for a moment she thought she might die. But then, just as sudden as it started, it stopped. Chike, breathing heavily, stumbled away from her and collapsed onto the couch. Adaeze lay there, her body bruised and aching, tears streaming down her face. She didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. She couldn't hear Chike snoring softly, already passed out from the alcohol. Slowly, painfully, she crawled into the bedroom and locked the door behind her. That night, she cried herself to sleep, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The next morning, Chike acted as if nothing had happened. He ate the breakfast she prepared without a word, barely glancing at her as he left for work. Adaeze watched him go, feeling a mix of relief and fear. She knew that it was only a matter of time before the next outburst. As the day turned into weeks, Adaeze's fear grew. The beatings became more frequent, and she could feel the toll it was taking on her body. The baby, once so active, seemed to move less and less, and Adaeze was terrified that something was wrong. She wanted to go to the hospital to see a doctor, but Chike had forbidden it. "We don't have money for that nonsense," he said. "You will be fine. Women have babies all the time." But Adaeze wasn't fine. One night, she woke up in excruciating pain. It felt like her insides were being ripped apart, and she knew something was wrong with the baby. She tried to wake Chike, but he pushed her away, muttering angrily in his sleep. Desperate and scared, Adaeze knew she couldn't wait any longer. She needed help. Summoning every ounce of strength she had left, she dressed herself and stumbled out of the house. The streets were quiet, the city still asleep, but Adaeze didn't care. She had to find help. She walked for what felt like hours, her body screaming in pain with every step. Finally, she reached the hospital. The nurses took one look at her and immediately rushed her inside. Adaeze was too weak to explain what had happened, but they didn't need an explanation. The bruises on her body, the fear in her eyes, it was all too familiar. They called the doctor who examined her and confirmed her worst fear. The baby was in distress, and if they didn't act quickly, both Adaeze and the child would be in grave danger. As they prepared for an emergency C-section, Adaeze felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had failed her baby. She had stayed in that house, endured the abuse, and now her child was paying the price. She closed her eyes, praying to God for mercy, for the strength to survive, for the life of her baby. When Adaeze woke up, the room was quiet. She would hear the faint beeping of machines, but she didn't know where she was. Her body felt heavy, and for a moment, she couldn't remember what had happened. Then, like a flood, the memories came rushing back. The pain, the hospital, the baby. Panicked, she tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her abdomen stopped her. A nurse rushed over, gently pushing her back down. "Don't move," the nurse said softly. "You have been through a lot. Just rest." "The baby," Adaeze whispered, her voice barely audible. "Is my baby okay?" The nurse's express faltered for a moment, and Adaeze's heart sank. But before she could ask again, the door opened and the doctor walked in. He was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle appearance. He sat down next to Ada's bed, taking her hand in his. "Your baby is alive," he said, and Adaeze felt a wave of relief wash over her. But the look on his face told her there was more. However, the baby was born prematurely and there are some complications. "We are doing everything we can, but the next few days will be critical." Adaeze nodded, tears streaming down her face. She had been so close to losing her child, and now, even though the baby was alive, there was still so much uncertainty. She felt a deep sense of hopelessness, but also a trace of hope. Her baby was a fighter. Adaeze lay in a hospital bed, her mind racing despite the overwhelming exhaustion. The doctor's word echoed in her ears. The next few days will be critical. The baby's life hung in the balance, and she felt powerless.